Dear parent, can you even open your 20-something's bedroom door without bracing yourself first? Perhaps you have to push the door with your shoulder because a mountain of laundry has collapsed against it from the inside, forcing you to step over hoodies, socks, and sweatpants just to navigate a path to the bed. The landscape of the room is likely all too familiar. Half-empty water bottles scattered across the floor, 3 crusty coffee mugs lingering on the nightstand, snack wrappers shoved hastily into drawers, and a web of chargers tangled like vines across a cluttered desk. In the center of it all sits a gaming chair facing a glowing screen, positioned next to a bed that looks like it hasn't been reset in weeks. A stack of plates is pushed to the side because carrying them to the kitchen somehow feels like climbing Mount Everest. There are empty Amazon boxes neglected in the corner, a capless tube of toothpaste slowly drying out on the dresser, and old-school papers mixed indiscriminately with crumpled receipts. It is a space that feels less like a bedroom and more like the physical manifestation of a stalled life. Yet, incredibly, this same young adult can sit in that chair and game for hours with razor-sharp focus. This stark contrast leads to the frustrating question almost every parent asks me. If they can focus like that, why can't they get their life together? Answering that question is exactly why I do the work I do. Welcome back to the Path to Peace Therapy podcast. I'm Stephanie Buckley, a parenting strategist, ADHD specialist, and family systems coach. I have been married to my husband for over 3 decades, and together we have raised a now thriving neurodivergent son who is 23 years old and has ADHD. My personal experience as a parent and my professional work with families intersect every single day in my practice. I deeply understand the profound confusion parents feel when they look at a bright, creative young adult who seems capable of so much, yet appears completely paralyzed and stuck. I know the palpable tension that builds in a home when parents feel like they are helplessly watching their child's potential slip through their fingers. Furthermore, I understand the quiet, heavy shame that many young adults harbor when they genuinely want more for their lives, but simply cannot figure out how to bridge the massive gap between their intentions and their actions. That intricate dynamic is exactly why I choose to work with 20-somethings in their natural habitat, which, more often than not, is their bedroom. When a 20-something meets with me in my Hermosa Beach office, we can usually have a wonderful, inspiring conversation. They can talk passionately and enthusiastically about the clothing line they want to design, the music they are eager to produce, the marine biology program they are considering, or the trade school they want to attend. In that controlled environment, they are articulate, insightful, funny, and full of hope, often leaving my office feeling energized and genuinely ready to implement change. But then, real life inevitably happens. They might walk outside to find a parking ticket because they rushed and failed to notice it was street sweeping day. Or they might head home feeling optimistic, only to walk into a wall of tension because a parent glanced into their disastrous bedroom earlier that afternoon. Sometimes, frustration has so thoroughly hijacked the emotional climate of the house that no one even greets them when they walk through the door. Within minutes, the fragile hope they built in my office evaporates. Retreating to the very room that overwhelms them, they sink back into the gaming chair, turn on the screen, and disappear into a digital world where they finally feel competent and in control again. This cycle is precisely why I prefer to meet them where the problem actually lives, their room. The physical state of their bedroom tells me the unvarnished truth about their executive functioning in a way an office visit never could. Executive functioning refers to the brain's complex management system, encompassing critical life skills such as planning, organizing, prioritizing, initiating tasks, retaining working memory, sequencing steps, and following through to completion. These essential functions are largely governed by the prefrontal cortex, the region right behind the forehead that essentially acts as the brain's chief executive officer. when this executive functioning is compromised, as is highly typical for individuals with ADHD, everyday tasks can feel overwhelmingly complex and entirely unmanageable. What looks like one straightforward chore to a parent, such as cleaning a room, actually translates into 50 separate, exhausting tasks for the ADHD brain. Every single item lying on the floor becomes a demanding decision point. Is this shirt clean or dirty? Where exactly does it belong? Should I take it to the wash now or put it in a pile? Where do these dishes go? And what should I do with all these tangled cords and loose papers? These relentless micro-decisions quickly pile up until the cognitive load becomes too heavy, causing the brain to simply shut down in self-defense. Consequently, when the brain shuts down, the physical environment rapidly begins to deteriorate. In the midst of this overwhelming environment, many of the 20-somethings I work with retreat into gaming for extended periods. It is vital for parents to understand that, for these young adults, gaming is rarely just entertainment. Rather, it has become their primary method of self-medicating and regulating a highly stressed nervous system. The compelling nature of gaming lies in its masterful activation of the brain's reward system, particularly the nucleus accumbens, which responds strongly to dopamine, a neurotransmitter heavily involved in motivation, reinforcement, and pleasure. Video games are expertly designed to deliver rapid, highly predictable dopamine spikes by providing clear, achievable goals, immediate feedback, highly visible progress, and frequent rewards, locking the brain into a continuous loop of stimulation and accomplishment. Conversely, during this time, the prefrontal cortex, which handles long-term planning, effortful real-world tasks, and delayed gratification, remains critically underutilized. Over time, the young adult's brain begins to strongly prefer the guaranteed high dopamine stimulation of the virtual world over the much slower, far less predictable rewards of real-world effort. The devastating result of this shift is profound isolation. As the young adult becomes increasingly reluctant to tolerate the discomfort required to move forward in reality, socializing feels harder, applying for jobs feels impossible, and starting new projects seems hopelessly daunting. The bedroom shrinks into the only safe place to exist, while the gaming console transforms into their most reliable and often only source of confidence. Knowing how overwhelmed they are, when I first begin working with a young adult via Zoom in their room, I bypass the monumental mess and start with a very simple question. When was the last time you changed your sheets? Most of the time, they have to pause and genuinely think about it, often realizing it has been many weeks. That is exactly where our work begins. Together, over the camera, we strip the bed, gather the sheets, and physically walk them to the washer. If they possess a second set of sheets, we put them on immediately. If not, we still achieve a visual reset of the bed by smoothing out the mattress, pulling up the comforter, and neatly arranging the pillows. I make a point to explain exactly why this specific action matters so much. Making the bed is a relatively small achievement, but small achievements carry enormous neurological weight for someone battling ADHD paralysis. I refer to these moments as earning an attaboy, a small, tangible acknowledgement of progress that serves as a quick internal reward, signaling to the brain that it successfully started and completed a task. Accumulating these small wins is absolutely crucial for rebuilding a foundation of confidence and forward momentum. Because so many of these young adults have endured years of unfinished tasks, mounting criticism, and deep frustration, they have been conditioned to expect failure before they even attempt to start. A freshly made bed stands in the middle of the chaos as undeniable, physical proof that change is actually possible. Once we have established that first victory with the bed, we naturally transition to tackling the laundry. The core issue with laundry is rarely a lack of a hamper. Rather, the existing system simply requires too many exhaustive decisions, leading straight to decision fatigue, a state where the brain becomes completely drained from making repeated choices. To combat this, we implement drastically simplified systems that bypass the need for intense executive function. For example, we might set up a 3-section laundry sorter dedicated exclusively to whites, colors, and darks. By ensuring that worn clothing goes immediately and directly into the correct section, we entirely eliminate the paralyzing need to sort through a massive pile later on. Furthermore, we establish a specific, recurring day and time to actually run the wash, relying on the power of routine to carry them through. We do this because motivation is a highly fickle and fluctuating resource, particularly for the neurodivergent brain, whereas ingrained, simplified systems naturally endure even on the hardest days. The physical transformation of the space often begins taking shape within our very first session together. Trash is bagged up and removed. Crusty dishes finally make their way back to the kitchen sink. A load of laundry gets started. Stray shoes are corralled back into the closet. The desktop is wiped clear, and the bed stands neatly made. Suddenly, the entire room looks and feels remarkably different. More importantly, the young adult standing in the center of it feels fundamentally different. They are now occupying a space that reflects deliberate action instead of chronic avoidance, allowing them to visibly see the undeniable results of their own effort and finally take a deep breath in the refreshing absence of chaos. This visual reset yields a profoundly powerful psychological effect. Visual clutter acts as a constant, blaring stress signal for the brain. When a room is deeply chaotic, the nervous system constantly interprets the environment as a room full of urgent, unfinished business. Once that environment becomes orderly and peaceful, the alarm bells silence, allowing the brain to finally relax and begin thinking clearly about the future again. One of the most beautiful and effective aspects of these working sessions is that young adults find it incredibly easy to open up and talk while their bodies are moving. As they actively clean and organize their space, our conversation naturally flows into the deeper, underlying patterns of their lives. We openly discuss the emotional realities of why the room became so cluttered in the first place, how gaming subtly shifted into becoming the primary regulator of their mood, and what they actually want their adult life to look like beneath all the avoidance. We explore the painful gap between their vivid creativity and their current lack of structure, utilizing these moments for active psychoeducation. Psychoeducation involves teaching them about the specific psychological and neurological processes that directly influence their behavior, ultimately empowering them to deeply understand themselves and make much better, more informed decisions. Week after week, as they stack those small attaboys and master their environment, they naturally begin to take significantly larger steps outside of the bedroom. They might return to a university, enroll in a specialized design school, pursue a marine biology program, enter a skilled trade like electrical work, or even dive into entrepreneurship. My ultimate goal is never about forcing them into a rigid, traditional mold. Rather, the goal is simply helping them find their footing so they can finally begin to move forward on their own unique path. Throughout this process, I also make sure to have very open, honest conversations with them about the realities and responsibilities of adulthood. We talk candidly about the necessity of work, the importance of contributing to rent, and the reality of paying for their own bills, framing these not as punitive measures or punishments, but as foundational elements of their own personal dignity and independence. In doing so, I often have to explain a complex dynamic that frequently surprises well-meaning parents. When parents continually swoop in to rescue their adult children from the consequences of their inaction, the young adult rarely feels a deep sense of gratitude. In fact, they most often feel a profound brewing anger. This paradoxical reaction occurs because habitual over-rescuing directly prevents them from developing their own crucial sense of competence. Over time, being constantly saved leaves them feeling highly dependent, deeply ashamed, and severely infantilized. That festering resentment inevitably gets directed right back toward the parent, even when the parent was acting purely out of love and a desperate desire to help. Ultimately, while structured support actively builds a young adult's capacity to thrive, constant rescue will reliably erode it. When I choose to work with 20-somethings in their natural habitat, I am doing so much more than merely helping them clean their room. I am fundamentally helping them reclaim their forward movement in life. Because the profound truth is that once the physical room changes, the deeply stressed nervous system finally has the space to regulate and change with it. Once the nervous system regulates and changes, intrinsic motivation naturally begins to return. And once that motivation returns, their incredible potential and purpose finally have a clear, solid place to land. When a young adult is meeting me in my office, whether we are connecting via Zoom or sitting in person in my Hermosa Beach office, we are often operating within an artificially controlled environment. While my office is a safe, warm, and highly supportive space, it inadvertently creates what I call a false positive for their executive functioning. Sitting in my office, they are temporarily borrowing my structured environment and my regulated nervous system to process their thoughts. In that space, there are no visual triggers. There are no towering piles of laundry, no crusty plates shoved under a desk, and no tangled cords reminding them of their daily unfinished tasks. Because my office is entirely free of the physical chaos that usually overwhelms them, it becomes incredibly easy for them to visualize a successful, productive future. They feel genuinely motivated because the clinical setting itself is inherently motivating and clear. However, for a neurodivergent brain, motivation is highly state dependent, and coping skills do not easily generalize across different environments. The brilliant insights, hopeful plans, and strategies we discuss while meeting me in my office simply do not translate the moment they walk back into their sensory overloading, chaotic bedroom. The overwhelming physical environment of their bedroom instantly overrides the beautiful intentions they built in my office. The traditional clinical visit relies on a level of executive functioning and environmental control that they simply do not yet possess. This profound disconnect is exactly why I shift the focus to their natural habitat and rely so heavily on the concept of the attaboy. An attaboy is not just a cute phrase or a passing compliment. It is a vital, targeted neurological intervention designed specifically for the ADHD brain. The ADHD brain is chronically starved for dopamine, which is exactly why it naturally gravitates toward the immediate, high-reward, hyper-stimulating world of video games. Mundane, multi-step tasks like cleaning an entire room offer absolutely zero intrinsic dopamine reward for a neurodivergent brain. However, earning an attaboy, like successfully stripping the bed, putting on clean sheets, and smoothing out the comforter, provides an immediate, externalized, and tangible hit of dopamine. When a 20-something looks at a disastrous room, their compromised prefrontal cortex perceives one massive, impossible threat, leading straight to debilitating task paralysis. An attaboy cuts through that paralysis by forcing the brain to focus on just one manageable microstep. It lowers the barrier to entry so drastically that the brain cannot find a valid excuse to say no. After years of failing to launch and experiencing a deep, heavy sense of learned helplessness, these young adults have been conditioned by their own track record to expect failure before they even try. By securing a quick, undeniable physical win right out of the gate in their own space, we actively interrupt that ingrained shame cycle. The attaboy serves as undeniable proof to their nervous system that they are still capable of starting and completing a task, generating the exact momentum needed to tackle the next one. While meeting me in my office asks them to imagine success, the attaboy physically builds the executive functioning they desperately need, right there in the room with them. As a parent, it is incredibly easy to look at a disastrous bedroom and interpret the towering mess as sheer stubbornness or blatant disrespect. But we have to redefine what we are actually looking at when we stand in that doorway. What often looks like intentional resistance is, in reality, profound executive dysfunction paralysis. Your 20-something is not refusing to clean their room out of malice. Their ADHD brain is simply completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of micro decisions required to execute the task. Shifting your perspective from the frustrating thought of, my child is being lazy, to the clinical reality of my child's brain is paralyzed is a crucial pivot for any parent. It replaces mounting resentment with necessary empathy, allowing you to stop fighting their behavior and start actively supporting their neurology. As a solution-focused therapist, my goal is never to just dwell on the dysfunction. I am constantly looking for the exceptions, the specific areas where your young adult is already highly capable. Even sitting in the center of a chaotic room, they possess immense untapped strengths. Once we clear the visual noise of the bedroom through those small, manageable attaboys, their actual strengths finally have the space to breathe and expand. Whether they are a brilliant coder, a gifted artist, or like my own thriving, neurodivergent, extremely talented musician, 23-year-old son full of creative potential, the ultimate goal of resetting the room is not merely to have a clean floor. The real goal is to systematically remove the environmental barriers that are actively blocking their natural neurodivergent superpowers from taking flight in the real world. Furthermore, because I look at the family dynamic through the lens of family systems, we have to recognize how this physical shift impacts the entire household. When that bedroom finally changes, the ripple effect on the family is immediate and profound. Imagine the moment a parent walks past the open bedroom door and, instead of letting out a heavy sigh of disappointment, simply looks in and says, "Room looks good." That single neutral interaction completely changes the trajectory of the day for both of you. By taking the constant, grinding friction of the messy room out of the equation, we immediately lower the emotional temperature of the entire house, effectively stopping the exhausting cycle of nagging, defensiveness, and avoidance that keeps everyone entirely stuck. Before we close today, I want to remind you that this episode is for educational purposes and to provide support. It is not a substitute for professional mental health evaluation, diagnosis, or treatment. The more we understand the signs behind the behaviors we see in our children and young adults, the more compassion and clarity we can bring to the situation. When we understand how the brain works, what executive functioning challenges look like, and how environments influence behavior, we can begin to respond with strategies instead of frustration. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, I would truly appreciate it if you shared it with a fellow parent, caregiver, educator, or someone who might benefit from hearing this message. You can also subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes and explore additional tools and resources at thepathtopeacetherapy.com. You can follow me on Instagram at thepathtopeacetherapy. If you are in California, I offer virtual sessions throughout the state, and if you are in the Hermosa Beach or South Bay area, I also offer in-person sessions. You can learn more or book a session through my website. And as always, take a deep breath, give yourself some grace, and remember, peace is possible, and you don't have to do this alone.